a dark voodoo tale of Chantal, who unknowingly stepped into a nightmare when she married into a family with ties to the darkest voodoo priest. Little did she know, her husband's family had made a deal with forces beyond comprehension to ensure their son, a wealthy businessman, would forever serve their twisted desires. Can Chantal survive the sinister plots of her in-laws? Will their son escape the clutches of their dark legacy? And what price will his parents pay for dabbling in such nefarious voodoo practices? Join us as we uncover the answers to these questions in this bone-chilling story. Welcome to the full version of My Cursed Family-in-Law. Dear viewers of Black Horror Stories, welcome to the new tale. This story is a personal account by Chantal, dealing with an in-law family that is not what it seems. Enjoy. My name is Chantal, and in the winter of 2022, I got married to my husband. We are from India, so our marriage had to be conducted traditionally. It starts with the legal registration of the marriage, and a week later, the ceremony takes place. The ceremony, the traditional wedding, involves various rituals, and we began by bringing the bride to the maro. The maro is the wedding altar, and my father and brothers accompanied me to officially give me away to my groom. The hall was filled with family and friends. I sat separately in a room with my cousins, who looked at me with admiration. While everyone around me was happy and couldn't wait for the ceremony, my heart was crying. I cried because after today, I would be living with my husband, far away from my family. My heart also cried because my legal marriage didn't go as planned. It started as a romantic day, getting dressed up, styling my hair, putting on the wedding dress, saying "I do," exchanging rings, sharing the first kiss, and having a family dinner. All were fantastic. Sounds beautiful, right? It ended in drama. After our legal marriage, we came home, still at my parental home, after a fantastic evening, when suddenly the phone rang. My brother answered and shouted across the room, "Dad, it's Amir's father. He urgently wants to talk to you." I was startled by my brother's tone and listened attentively to what he had to say. My father put the phone on speaker, and after saying hello, Amir's father started hurling terrible insults at my father, mother, and grandparents with the most dreadful words. I didn't know what was happening, but I was angry. I called Amir and told him that I wanted nothing more to do with him and his family. If your parents can be so disrespectful to my family, I don't want any part of it. Amir was shocked by my decision and said he was on his way to discuss it. He ended with, "Please don't cancel anything. I love you." After 2 hours, he stood at the door with his mother. I said, "I don't understand why your father is behaving like this." He also didn't know why his father was behaving that way. Amir begged me not to cancel the wedding, promising to take care of me and that I wouldn't regret it. His mother looked at me from a corner of the room and said nothing. Suddenly, she stood up and said, "Don't worry, Chantal. Amir will take good care of you." I decided not to cancel the wedding, and that brings us back to where the story began, the traditional wedding day. Before we continue, please press the like button. This helps us grow. Let's continue. There I sat, waiting to be escorted to the maro. After the groom's rituals were performed by the priest, my family escorted me to the maro. Here, the priest completed all the wedding rituals. Then came our first dance. Amir held me tightly and sang in my ear, and we spent the rest of the evening dancing with family and friends. The moment of saying goodbye to my parents, brother, and family was tough. As mentioned, I was now moving far away. I had never seen my father cry, but as I was carried out of the hall in a dolly, traditional bridal palanquin, I looked at my family and saw tears in everyone's eyes. People, was this a sign that I should have stopped? The story only gets worse from here. After a 2-hour drive, we finally arrived at my new home, and Amir helped me out of the car. His mother and sisters were at the door and ran to him. I wasn't looked at, and the first thing his mother said to me was, "Chantal, where's that box with all the gifts and envelopes?" I pointed to the car because it was still in there, and she grabbed it and said, "Give this to me." I never saw that box again, and once inside the house, I stood shyly in the hallway. It was all new to me. His mother looked at me and said, "I don't need to show you the house and the family, because you will slowly get to know everyone, and you'll have to discover the house yourself." A week later, my mother-in-law came with my sisters-in-law to visit. She mentioned that she and my father-in-law were leaving for Africa for a vacation the next day. They had planned this well before the wedding, so they couldn't be with us during the first weeks. I didn't mind, because there was no connection between me and my mother-in-law. I spent the rest of the evening chatting with my sisters-in-law when my mother-in-law suddenly stood up and asked Amir, "May I see your home? Perhaps I can bring some beautiful things from Africa for you." Amir said, "Mom, there's the lady of the house. Ask Chantal to show you around." Before I could say anything, she stood up and said, irritated, "Forget it. It's not necessary." I tried to keep the peace and asked if she wanted something to eat or drink, but nothing was good anymore. She stood up and told her daughters that there had been enough talking and it was time to leave. The next day, my in-laws left for Africa, and we didn't go to the airport because my mother-in-law had indicated that she didn't want that. I found this strange because we hadn't parted on good terms the day before. Amir told me that he had called his sisters that evening because they were also involved in his business, and he wanted to discuss some matters with them. Amir was a real estate agent and owned several large properties. Business was going well, and I had meanwhile quit my job because Amir would support me in my dream of setting up a daycare center. He told his sister on the phone about our plan to open a daycare, and his mother overheard something. She started cursing in the background and was extremely angry. However, she decided to go to bed because she would leave for Africa the next day. Days passed, and I was busy preparing for our honeymoon. The suitcases were packed, and the house was tidy. I left the spare keys with my sister-in-law so she could water the plants. One more night to sleep, and then we would fly to our holiday destination, Bali. I was already in bed, and Amir was still in the office in his business property. He wanted to finish the last things so he could go on vacation with a clear conscience. Due to fatigue, I fell asleep, and after some time, I woke up suddenly. I was completely sweaty. My face and body were soaked while it was cold in the room. I found it strange because, before going to bed, the house was comfortably warm. I thought I might be getting sick and hoped that this wasn't the case. Who wants to get sick 24 hours before their honeymoon? No one. I went downstairs to make a cup of tea with honey and lemon. When I looked at the clock, it was already 1 o'clock in the morning, and I wondered where Amir was. I grabbed my phone, and while I was looking for his number, I heard noises coming from the bedroom. It sounded like someone was dragging a bag. I put away my phone and courageously went to the hallway to listen better. When I arrived in the hallway, I heard nothing more. It was strange because the sound came from the bedroom. I told myself it must have been outside because I was alone at home, so no one could be dragging something in the bedroom. A few seconds later, I heard the door, and I saw my husband, Amir, coming in. He asked me what was going on, but I decided not to say anything. We then went to bed together and fell asleep. I was in a deep sleep when suddenly I heard Amir screaming. I woke up and looked at him, seeing that he was all sweaty. I asked Amir what was going on, and he told me breathlessly that he felt something slowly approaching him. It was a black shadow, and as it got closer, his body became stiff, and he couldn't do anything. He tried to open his eyes, to turn around, to scream, but he couldn't do anything. Amir said, "Chantal, it didn't look like a dream. It felt real, Chantal. It felt real." I said, "Darling, it's just a dream. Invoke the name of God, and nothing will come to you." And we went back to sleep. A few hours later, our alarm went off, and we left to the airport for our honeymoon. We were excited, but not prepared for what was to come. Amir's parents didn't leave for Africa for no reason, and we would soon find out. Now I'll continue to tell you how this trip to Africa would impact the rest of our lives. By now, we were on our way to our vacation destination, where our honeymoon could finally begin. We had a few hours left on the plane, and Amir was peacefully asleep, so I decided to take a nap as well. Suddenly, Amir started screaming, drawing the attention of everyone around us in the crowded plane. He jumped up and began yelling at everyone nearby. I was completely confused and started to panic. Why was he acting this way? The flight attendants intervened, calming him down, and he returned to his seat. I felt embarrassed and asked him what had happened. He explained that it felt like someone was attacking him, but he couldn't do anything about it. This had happened repeatedly, and he was fed up with it. Once we landed in Bali, a taxi took us to the hotel. The hotel was beautiful. The view, the pool, the restaurant. Everything was stunning about this place. We had a delightful first day and went to bed exhausted, if you catch my drift. However, as I fell asleep, the nightmare began again, waking me up to Amir's screams. I looked beside me, and it felt like someone else was lying there, despite seeing Amir. It was clear that something or someone had taken possession of him. Terrified, I tried to follow him, seeking help from the receptionist, but I couldn't stop him, and he left the hotel. The receptionist assumed we had a disagreement and calmly said, "He'll be back shortly. Go back to your room." I returned to my room and didn't sleep the whole night. The next morning, Amir still hadn't returned. I called my parents for help, but nobody answered. Imagine being on your honeymoon and your husband suddenly disappears. At the reception, they suggested involving the police. I had to wait in the lounge until the police arrived to hear my story. Suddenly, I saw Amir walking in a confused state. He stared ahead as if he were lost. I ran to him, and the receptionist followed. Offering water, we asked Amir what had happened and where he had been. Amir stared ahead as if we weren't there, and, after 5 minutes, responded, "Chantal, I don't know what's happening, but I see and hear voices in my head." Well, Black Horror Stories followers, I booked the next flight home with Amir. By then, I had reached my parents, and once we landed, they picked us up and took us to their home. We didn't sleep at our place, but stayed with my parents. They sought help from a family pandit, a Hindu priest. After the pandit's intervention and a special drink for Amir, I noticed a clear improvement. Before we continue, please hit the like button. It helps us grow. Let's continue. After a week at my parents' place, we returned to our own home. As we entered our street, an uneasy feeling washed over me. When we parked in front of our house, I looked at the front door. It seemed cold and eerie. Inside, the house was freezing, so I turned on the heating and started unpacking. Weeks passed, and my in-laws had returned from Africa. We were glad as we hadn't heard from them during that time. They weren't aware of what had happened in Bali, so we decided to visit. They welcomed us with various African goodies. Besides delicious food, there were strange figurines, apparently normal in Africa, and we accepted them happily. Eventually, we shared what had happened in Bali, but oddly, my in-laws didn't react. They continued happily with their vacation stories. Strange, right? Hungry, I decided to serve myself food when my mother-in-law approached and said she had cooked something special for me. "Hey dear, I made this pot just for you because I know you don't like a lot of pepper. This pot is very mild." I was pleased, thinking my mother-in-law finally accepted me as her daughter-in-law. With a smile, I served my food, and after a delightful meal, Amir announced that we would head home. When he mentioned leaving, his mother held him back and handed him the spare key to our house. I looked at how she handed over the key and found it strange. How did my mother-in-law get my spare key? After all, I had given it to my sister-in-law, Shivani, not her. A few days later, the drama returned to our home. Amir was off and away due to work, and I was mostly home alone. When I slept, I saw a large shadow approaching, a clear male figure. This shadow constantly tried to strangle me. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed and couldn't scream. Eventually, when it released me, I woke up sweating, and strange things continued happening in our house. Sometimes, heavy footsteps. I heard someone calling my name, but when I told Amir, he got angry. He even pushed me once. Tired of my stories, according to him, it seemed like Amir was slowly changing. Every time I asked him something, he responded angrily, eventually resorting to hitting me. People never accept this, because what I had to endure next was no joke. Amir hit me for every little thing, and we drifted further apart. I was trapped at home, almost cut off from the outside world. He confiscated my phone and took my keys when he went to work. I couldn't leave, and the front windows of our house were not open enough for me to climb out. I was so sad. This was 2 months into my marriage. How could life change so much in 2 months? My life turned into a true hell. My husband hit me. Every night, the shadow bothered me in my sleep, and I constantly heard footsteps in the house. I was terrified in my own home. One Saturday evening, Amir came home with friends. He had called that they would come over later that night and asked me to prepare food. I did, and when they arrived, Amir and his friends started eating. It turned out one of his friends was celebrating a birthday. Amir called me over, and as I stood next to him, he said with a smile, "Hey buddy, it's your birthday today, and I haven't given you a gift yet. Here, please, have fun with her." And he pushed me towards his friend. Black Horror Stories followers, my husband grabbed my hand, threw me to his friend and said, "Have fun with her." I didn't know what was happening, and it all happened very quickly. I think my body went into survival mode because I can't remember everything. His friend stood up, grabbed me, dropped his pants, and asked the other guys if they wanted to have a good night. And the other friends gathered around me. That night, I was abused by his friends. My husband sat on a chair, watching as a cloth was stuffed into my mouth to silence my screams. Tears streamed down my face, and he didn't care. Amir watched as his friends had their way with me all night. I felt nothing. My body hurt, and I couldn't stop crying. When they were finally done with me, they left me lying on the ground like a piece of trash. Amir stood up, walked towards me, and said, "If you ever tell anyone about this, I'll kill you and your family." I closed my eyes and fell asleep on the living room floor that night. Slowly, I opened my eyes, feeling only cold around me. My body ached as if a horse had trampled over me. I could vaguely recall moments from the evening, but Amir's cold glares haunted me to this day. I got up slowly and limped upstairs to the bathroom, where I screamed to release the pain. I cried while washing myself, scrubbing so hard that I left wounds. The worst part was that I had nowhere to go. Everything was closed off to me, and I had no contact with the outside world. Besides, I was afraid of Amir. I didn't want to go to the room, so I grabbed my blanket and hobbled to the attic. There, in the darkness, I hid, contemplating how to move forward. Where could I go? How could I reach my parents? Lost in thought, I fell asleep and was suddenly grabbed by my legs. I screamed, thinking it was Amir, but when I opened my eyes, no one was there. The attic reeked, a stench like rotting meat. The smell was so strong that I vomited. I vomited so much that it hurt, and the terrible smell made me retch repeatedly. Then, I heard familiar footsteps coming up the stairs. They were Amir's, and I became scared again. He approached me, saying, "Hey, sweetheart, go shower and change. We're having dinner at my parents' place," and reached out his hand to help me up. I slapped his hand away, saying I wasn't going anywhere. I asked him why he did this to me, but Amir didn't respond. All he said was, "Fine then, I'll say you're sick," and turned away. Eventually, I heard the front door close and the key turning in the lock. Amir didn't come home for 2 weeks, leaving me alone without food and necessities. Fortunately, we had a well-stocked pantry, but it was running out. Every night, something in the house bothered me, and the rotten smell now pervaded not just the attic, but the entire home. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and I ran to the window, where I saw my parents, grandma, and brothers. I was so happy to see them that I cried and screamed that I couldn't leave the house. The windows upstairs had locks, and the ones downstairs couldn't open fully. My brother loosened a paving stone and threw it at my front window. Both my brothers climbed inside immediately, and once inside, they were shocked by what they found. My brother went back to the window, shouting that no one should come near the house. One of my brothers vomited due to the smell in the house, and my older brother immediately realized that something was wrong. He asked where Amir was and how I had lost so much weight in 2 months. For the first time in days, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw how emaciated I had become. My ribs were visible, along with all the bruises and belt marks on my back. My brother said, "Get dressed, put on something warm, and grab your things. You're not staying here a minute longer." I looked at my older brother and told him that I didn't dare to go upstairs. I told him there was something up there, a ghost, something not right. I didn't know, but a man was bothering me every night, I told him, crying. My brother grabbed a coat, saying we needed to leave the house as quickly as possible. He ran upstairs and threw everything he saw of mine into trash bags. While they packed, we suddenly heard heavy footsteps coming down from the attic. My brothers looked at me, and suddenly, we heard voices. My brother went to check, but couldn't find anyone or anything. He grabbed me and said we had to leave now. Whatever haunted this house seemed angry. We heard various noises, but saw nothing, and the smell of rotting flesh became more intense. It seemed like someone was growling with aggression. I was so scared that it would harm us, but my brother held me tight, saying whatever it was, don't let it drive you crazy. I was so weakened that I could barely stand on my own. My brother carried me downstairs, and upstairs, we only heard banging on the walls and growling. Through the kitchen window, my brother called for my father to get me out. My father caught me on the other side, and my brothers climbed out, coughing. When my parents and grandma saw me and heard the story about the rotten smell in the house, my grandma immediately said it was a demon. I had no strength to talk or walk and fainted. My brothers, parents, and grandma were so angry. All they said was, "What have they done to you, girl? What have they done?" My older brother was so furious that he decided to drive to my in-laws. They lived just 10 minutes away from Amir's house. How come they didn't notice anything and never came to check? My older brother was enraged, driving full speed towards the house. But what we would find there, no one had expected. When we arrived, we saw my mother-in-law happily feeding Amir. Yes, people. She was feeding on him. They were laughing and seemed to be having the time of their lives. My brothers saw this and got so angry that they got out of the car and walked towards the house together. I had to stay in the car, but I was so weakened that the tension made me faint again. My mother stayed with me, and through tears, I heard her say, "What have they done to my child?" My brothers and father entered the house, and after more than half an hour, the front door opened, and Amir ran towards the car like a mad bull. My brother chased after him, and Amir shouted that if anyone took me away from him, he would cut me into pieces. Then, my father stormed out of the house, yelling that my in-laws were demons and that we needed to leave. We had nothing more to find there. Those were his last words before getting into the car. My older brother gave Amir a hard slap, causing him to fall to the ground. My brother leaned over Amir and said, "You forgot that we're still alive. Dare to approach Chantal again, and your end will be near." At the same moment, my mother ran out of the house, jumping over Amir. She told him that they were taking me and that they would file charges for confinement and abuse with the police. She also shouted that he should get a lawyer quickly for the divorce. After that, my brothers got into the car and we drove away. Little did we know that the worst was yet to come. After the argument at Amir's house, we drove to my parents' house. Things were not going well with me here. Due to not eating for so long, I had become weak. I would faint with every effort, and my grandmother advised my parents to find a pandit for help. My parents agreed, but they also saw that I was not able to walk or go anywhere now. They decided to shower me, and my grandmother rushed to the kitchen to prepare a good portion of dinner. My father explained that when he asked what was wrong with me at Amir's parents' house, Amir said that nothing was wrong and that I would come soon. According to Amir, I had gone grocery shopping and would return to his parents afterward. This, while he had left me alone in our house for 2 weeks without food or drink. My father said that the moment he mentioned I was outside in the car, Amir seemed to go crazy. He growled and ran outside, shouting that no one, absolutely no one, could take me away from him. While this happened, Amir's father calmly watched TV, and his mother happily smiled at my father. Because I was still very weak, my parents decided to put me to bed, and my father tried to contact the pandit. I had not been in bed for 5 minutes when the room went dark in my eyes. It seemed to darken slowly, and when it was almost black, a large black shadow jumped on me from under the bed. The shadow grabbed me by the throat, and I tried with all my last strength to fight against this shadow. The figure seemed to get a face, and it seemed as if I saw the outlines of a large dark man. His face became clearly visible, which startled me and gave me the strength to scream. I screamed, and my family in the living room ran to the room. I was bleeding without any apparent cause. My family found me in bed with my hands around my neck in a bloody mess. My father grabbed me, and while my brother held my hands, they lifted me towards the living room. My mother screamed that we would not wait for the arrival of the pandit, but that my brother had to fetch him urgently. My brother returned after an hour with the pandit. The pandit walked in and immediately said that something was seriously wrong. He was shocked by how I looked, but immediately stated that he could not help me. According to the pandit's words, there was a powerful demon around me that he could not remove without becoming a victim himself. He didn't even want my brother to take him home. I still hear him saying, "I will pray for you, but I cannot help here. You don't have to drop me off at home. I'll call a taxi." And he walked out the door. The days passed, and several pandits, voodoo priests, and doctors, but no one could help me. My situation got worse day by day. I had more and more trouble with that black shadow, and I kept losing blood. My family sat constantly by my bed and helped me with everything. I could hardly do anything myself anymore. I was assisted with eating, showering, dressing, and everything else. It seemed as if I could die at any moment, because every evening my parents prayed beside my bed to God for salvation, but nothing helped. So I secretly started to long for the end, and every night I told my parents that I loved them, and that if I were no longer there, they should remember me as I was before I got married and moved to Amir. One morning, the phone rang, and my father's uncle had heard what was going on. My uncle naturally had a loud voice, so I heard him say to my father that he was angry because no one had told him anything. He said that my father had to take a picture of me and send it to him. He knew a pandit from a village known for performing exorcisms. Just hearing this word gives me chills. People from black horror stories. Before we continue, I want to ask you to press the like button. This helps us to go viral. And don't forget to share this story on your own socials. The next morning, my uncle came with this pandit to our home. I was sitting on the couch, and the moment he walked in, I felt restless inside. I felt anger, fire, fear. It was a very strange feeling. I became so restless that I started screaming, "Mom, Mom, Mom, get that man away from here. Get that man away." My mother took pity on me and wanted to comply with my request. She told my uncle that they couldn't come into the living room. My uncle laughed and said, "If you want to believe what the demon says, it's up to you, but we're going to work today. Make room." My uncle and the pandit he was with came closer, and I felt my body rebelling. Suddenly, I got strength and stood up to fight with them. The pandit shouted that the demon was trying to take over my body, and that everyone had to come help to put me on the chair. People. It was a fight in the house. I had become so strong that it took 5 adult men to get me onto a chair, with each one holding me down. The pandit took his bag and sat opposite me on a chair. He said that he had already done the groundwork at home, and that he had received his message in a dream at night. Chantal has only 3 days left to live if we don't get to work. The demon in her is a soul sucker that slowly causes deterioration, and after 60 days, it takes its victim. I started laughing. People from Black horror stories. This was not a normal laugh, and I didn't know where it came from. I giggled and spoke in a language that, to this day, is unknown to everyone. The pandit then told my parents that he had done heavy work on me, and he also knows where it comes from. However, he cannot tell anything about it because that is not his task. He is here purely to make sure that things get better for me. I will help her, and your daughter will get better with God's will. I'm going to prepare a bath to cleanse her body. First, I'll give her something to drink, and then I want you to go into the shower room with her. After that, I'll give her a rope for protection, which she must always keep with her. And then I will pray with your daughter. This will also make sure that your daughter sees tonight in her dreams what is going on. This won't go away at once. We will have to do the rituals 3 days in a row, so prepare yourself for a tough time. Meanwhile, I had calmed down, and the pandit had 3 cloths with him. He had a red cloth, a white cloth, and a blue cloth. He placed them one by one on my head and spoke to me in our mother tongue. When tearing the cloths, it seemed as if I fell asleep. I was mentally present, but my body was disabled. My head hung, and the pandit took out 3 glasses from his bag. He put some substance in them and started praying. He said that if the demon was still present, the color of the substance should change, and in no time, the color of the substance changed to dark black. Everyone looked at each other, and at that moment, my eyes opened, and I started laughing loudly again. In my mother tongue, the demon said that no one, absolutely no one, could save me because my path to death was already mapped out. No one said anything, and the pandit stood up and calmly sat across from me again. He looked at me and said, "Chantal, if you are somewhere there, fight. Take my hand, and I will help you. You are way too young to die." Upon which my family also started praying, and I heard people from different sides saying that I should take his hand. I felt myself slowly coming to, and after a few minutes, I cautiously gave my hand to the pandit. He took my hand and started praying calmly. His prayer was so calming that I felt a peace come over me. I became so calm that I didn't even realize that he had come behind me in the meantime. He put both his hands on my shoulders and started reciting spells in our mother tongue. I wasn't proficient in our mother tongue, but I still understood every word he said. During the prayer, he stopped and asked me if I had ever eaten from a separate pot at my in-laws' house. Was it true that my mother-in-law had made a separate pot for me and a separate pot for my husband? As he said this, His hands began to shake vigorously, so much that my body moved along. With tears in his eyes, he sat down opposite me and said that he had just seen what had been done to me. He mentioned that I would receive my message from my ancestors in a dream, and it turned out that my ancestors were weakened, and through his bath and rituals, they had been somewhat strengthened again. He asked if Amir and I were planning to move, and I was shocked by this question. I was shocked because my parents didn't know this, but indeed, Amir and I were planning to move closer to my parents. Amir saw that I was not happy so far from my family and wanted to do everything to see me happy. Amir had only told his sisters about this, as mentioned in part 1 of this story. The pandit said that everything Amir had done was not his fault. His parents had manipulated him because they were jealous. He pointed to the glass with the discolored substance, asking me if I saw the color of the substance. "Do you see that, girl? Do you see the color? That is black magic, but not just black magic. This is a very old black magic that you don't come across quickly. You will see it all tonight, and when I come back tomorrow, I want you to tell me in detail what you have seen." He took the 3 glasses and told me to drink from one of them. We had to bury the glass with the discolored substance in the garden, and the 3rd glass had to stand in my room. "Tonight, she will see everything, but she will also see what your family," he pointed to my father, "did to her just before the wedding." Everyone looked surprised, and the pandit said that there was a man in my father's family who did not want the wedding to proceed, and that's why he had done heavy work on me. I was completely confused by all the stories and felt mentally exhausted. The pandit asked my mother to prepare a large basin in the bathroom and bring dry clothes. "We are going to cleanse her body so that your daughter can live. During the bathing, you must not say or be shocked about what comes out. I will explain it to you later," were the words of the pandit. My family took me to the bathroom, where I had to step into a basin. He then prepared his water in another basin and poured it over my head. During the bath, the pandit spoke in a certain language, and I noticed that my body started trembling. I looked at my body and saw green pus coming out of me. It was so disgusting, people, and I don't know where it came from. The pandit said that I should remain calm and believe in a good outcome. He pointed out to my family that no one should say anything while he was busy, no matter how scary or disgusting it might look. He kept praying, and after a while, you could clearly see that the green pus from my body turned black. People, this was so dark black that I get shivers when I think about it. After some time, he looked at my family and said that his work for the day was done. "The body of your daughter has been cleansed, and she has just been given a second life because it was not her time to go. Put her clothes and the water in a large bag and throw it into running water. It had to be genuinely flowing water so that the bag and the demon could be carried away by the water." He took my hand and asked me to join him in prayer. He expressed that I wanted to receive my messages tonight, and that these messages had to be clear. Leave nothing to chance, and show Chantal in detail what was going on. He greeted us and said he would see us again tomorrow. "It's been a tough day, dear. Go eat and rest well. Tomorrow, we'll go at it again, but then you'll know more." The pandit bid farewell and left. The house was quiet. Everyone was shocked by what had happened, and no one could could make sense of it. My father fetched some food from the kitchen, and I ate like a wolf, so quickly that I choked a few times. After eating, I was so tired that I went to bed, and that's when I had my dream. In my dream, I was in a beautiful land where it was sunny and the people were kind. I looked around and saw Amir's parents crossing the road hand in hand, accompanied by a tall, dark man. People, I was startled in my dream because this was the same face that I saw emerging from the shadow that tried to strangle me. They walked to a place where they were clearly burning human bodies. I saw human bodies lying everywhere, people who had been dead for some time. I also saw another couple telling the tall, dark man that they had no money for a cremation, so they were handing her father over to this man. He took the body and began to cut off body parts, setting aside a finger and an ear from the deceased. Then he threw the body onto a pile with other bodies and set it on fire. Next, I saw the man walk to an altar, and Amir's parents followed him. Once at the altar, he sat on a chair that resembled a throne, and Amir's parents knelt on the ground before him. In between them, I saw a cross made of ashes, and in the center of the cross, there was a picture of me and Amir. The man asked Amir's mother what he could do for them, and she replied firmly, "Amir is ours. He must always remain ours. You must ensure that he never, ever leaves us. Do you see his wife there? She wants to take him to another city. She must leave. She must leave," my mother-in-law screamed. The man was calm and brought out the finger he had just taken from the dead man, throwing some potions over it while uttering some words. Then he gave it to my mother-in-law, along with a bag of ashes. He instructed her to let the finger soak into the food of me and Amir, and then go to our house to sprinkle the ashes at the highest point. People of Black Horror Stories, don't forget to press the like button. I then saw my mother-in-law laughing, putting the finger into a separate pot, and my father-in-law ensuring that it was well mixed into the food with a spoon. I saw my mother-in-law walking through my house with a big smile, sprinkling ashes everywhere. Then I saw her leaving my house, saying as she walked away, "Now that rotten child can finally get lost." My dream didn't stop there. It continued, and suddenly, I was at my father and mother's house. What was I doing there? Why am I at my parents'? And what did they have to do with this? I saw my uncle at the door, and my father on his knees asking for forgiveness. My father asked him what he had done, and he then explained that he had cast spells on my marriage through a black magic book. He said he didn't want my father to be happy because my father was my grandmother's favorite. Everything went well for my father, according to my uncle, and it was time for him to face a difficult time too. He admitted to having spoken that I should be so unhappy that it would break my father's heart, and I would end up in a mental institution. The next morning, I told everyone about my dreams, and everyone was in shock. The pandit came by and helped me further, and slowly I started to feel better. I still had love for Amir, and then asked the pandit to visit him. Unfortunately, this never happened, because the pandit who helped me fell ill exactly 3 days after our last appointment. He called us and said that the demon had come with him, and someone had to complete the path intended for me. We got in the car and drove to the pandit, but when we arrived, we were too late. We found the pandit dead in his home, lying in a pool of blood, where the blood was as dark as the water during my bath. I am grateful to him so far because he took it over for me and gave me the chance at a new life. Did he know this while he was doing it? Was it a conscious choice? We'll never know. I never saw Amir again. A few years later, I ran into his sister, who then ran directly to me and said, Chantal, what has happened? And she started crying. I asked if she had heard anything about the situation, and she said that they had recently been to a pandit who told them a lot. I asked about Amir, and she started crying. Shortly after my departure, Amir started doing strange things. He ran naked in the street, tried to set his house on fire multiple times, and attacked people on the street. It got so bad that they eventually sought psychiatric care for Amir. This caused a shock to her parents, and then his mother died of a heart attack. Her father couldn't bear the grief and decided to end his own life. Dear people of Black horror stories, every bad deed will eventually come back to you, and when it does, it often comes worse than what you've done. Despite everything, I felt sorry for my ex-sister-in-law, but I politely declined her request to stay in touch. Now, 1 year later, I am slowly picking up my life. I have trauma, and am afraid that I will never let anyone into my life again.